All right, traders, welcome to today's recap. This is Christian from Tribeca Trade Group, and it is Thursday, August 15th. So, S&P did finish up 30 basis points today. We'll do this in terms of ETF terms. SPY finished up 26 basis points, so a little bit more than a quarter of a percent. Qs finished, so it looks like SPY outperformed. The diamonds also outperformed DIA. That finished up 0.5%. And then Qs underperformed a little bit. They finished down 10 basis points. And the small caps underperformed the most out of the major indices, down 40 basis points. So, kind of, I would say a pretty choppy day, right? This is always kind of a little bit of frustration, I think, once we're moving as fast as we have been for the last couple weeks. I know some people were calculating like the plus to minus percent move, 1%. I think this is the first day. I didn't count them, but I'm going to say just rough count, probably 2 weeks where we haven't had, a plus or minus 1% intraday move. Things kind of settled in a little bit. So, is there any major takeaways from today? Not much. Let me go through why I say that. And I've been putting out in the morning. Obviously, I do this for members, but I've been putting it out also on my public Twitter feed because I'm a nice guy. No, so what I've been talking about is just the S&P, how it's been setting up very super short term, right? So super short term, 1 hour chart, 5 minute chart. The value areas, again, I say it just about every video, but really give you a sense of where the range is for the day, for the week, and where we're out of range, right? And it's just very simple. And they give exceptional support and resistance areas. Again, it basically shows you where big buyers and big sellers, all the volume is triggered around. That's the beauty of the value areas, and they come in time and time again. So where are we right now? And this could change in the overnight session. We are just below value for the week, right? So we've got to get above 28.56. Otherwise, I mean, you could see a lot of back and forth. These candles, it just looks like a mess in here after this big move down. So unfortunately did not make it in here for the day, but we are very close. 28.56 is the bogey, right? And below that, I think you just kind of want to watch out because we could have some more continuation to the downside. Do I think that's going to happen? I mean, I think at this point sentiment's been pretty washed out, so I think the risk is to the upside at this point. Do I think 100%? No, not necessarily. So if I was say, could we have more downside? I would say maybe 25% chance tomorrow. One of the things that I noticed kind of at the end of the day, because we could see what the value area is like for not next week, but for tomorrow. Notice how slim the value area is. Usually when the value area, and again, nothing is 100% of the time, so, but when the value area is very slim, remember what this means again, if you're new to the value areas, somebody was just asking me about them and just how they work. It gives you approximately one standard deviation of the previous volume at price. Right. So, for example, look at how we kind of maintain inside value the whole day, except for trying to break down for part of the day this morning, and then we basically stayed in value for the majority of it. Again, a failure here and failure here again. So this is based on one standard deviation of the previous day's activity. So being that we didn't move much in a range, being that we didn't move out of the range today, you've got a very tight value area for tomorrow. And that can be very conducive to a big move. Again, I don't know which direction, but I would think if we could get a little bit higher, it's to the upside. That's the call I'm willing to take. Do I think it could go to the downside too? Absolutely. But I think it's kind of, this risk is skewed at this point, meaning that unless something else comes out, some other tape bomb that we don't know, which of course is definitely in the cards, the way it's been, the way the headlines have been, who knows? I'll talk about bonds next, but again, I think we're setting up for a big move tomorrow. I'll just reiterate that on Friday. So, and again, look at this. Look at the narrowness of the value area a couple days ago. All right, so it doesn't mean we're going to get that size of move, but just usually conducive to that. Nasdaq, I think the same type of thing. Price actually was around the lower end of that. And I think on the 1 hour, again, important to look at these in the 1 hour. This is inside value for the week, so you don't have to worry about that. Notice this virgin point of control taken out. What, yesterday was it, or no? That's last week. That's last week. So we are in value. IWM continues to kind of be a mystery. Underperforming, no bid in this thing at all, and continues to look very weak. So I want to talk about TLT and bonds for a minute, because this is one of the craziest moves I've seen in a long time. This move in bonds, I think at one point it kind of felt like a capitulation to the upside day, like a blow off top. But however, we managed to come back. So this thing was crazy. The VIX started to really pick up. I just this seems to always happen whenever I just jump off the desk and go get lunch for 5 minutes. I come back and like, what the hell is going on? And the VIX was moving up, but not that much. Up to 23, not as high as it was yesterday. And bonds were just, I mean, these again. The bonds don't normally move like this. What is the? I should look at this. I'm surprised I did not earlier. But if we bring up the Merrill Lynch Volatility Index of, I think this is of Treasuries, and if we put a line to this, right, you're going to see that the volatility in this thing is pretty remarkable. It says it's not as high as it was back in 2016, but certainly very decently high there. So yeah, I mean, now it was the 15th of the month. Sometimes new money is being put to work, so it could be somebody else was buying bonds. But I mean, this has been over. I keep saying this again, overbought. But at some point, this thing is due for a massive correction. Quick to the downside. And I think that, so what's the RSI on the daily? It's an 85, which is even more than it was yesterday. The ZB is an 80. So, that's anything. Remember, anything over 70 on the relative strength index, RSI, is overbought. Let's see where this is on the weekly. Weekly, we're at an 82. So again, huge trend. And if you've managed to stay long this, if you're a trend follower and you've stayed long this, congratulations. That's a damn hell of a trade. And I know trend traders, they don't care about overbought. Things can remain irrational, as they say. I said this yesterday too. Sometimes longer than you can stay solvent, right? I mean, I think if you've been trying to fade the bonds for like the last couple months, that's how it works, right? Markets can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent, and this is I would say, pretty irrational at this point. But buyers keep showing up in this, so that is that. Next subject. So yeah, I mean, I find that extremely interesting. Weekly chart, by the way, for the S&P, we're still holding 2816, so we're still holding the uptrend. Could it break into value tomorrow? It could. So we'll see. Again, a lot of things in the cards for tomorrow, I think. Let's go over to what to talk about next. Let's talk about high yield credit spreads. I always like to talk about these. They did push higher, right? They gave a little bit of a sell-off earlier in the week, and they're now higher than where they were. Again, not nearly as high as they were in December, but they are showing some stress. And I think, again, most of that is because the treasuries, right? I'm not trying to rationalize this, but it's because IEI is going higher. Like HYG, I think, was actually up on the day. It was up 30 basis points. So that's not terrible. but bonds, but the treasuries are just going, absolutely nuts. So we'll see. I before I say blow off top, sorry, I'll move to something else in just a second. But before I would say blow off top, the price has to duck below a moving average. The volume was as much as it was here on this day, and that was no blow off top either. So stay tuned for that. Let me move over to option activity. We finally saw, I think, a slight change from yesterday's tone. Um, and again, I would not say all. Let's look at the put call ratio, CPCE. Again, heightened, I guess, 1.17, which means that there was more puts again than calls. But we actually did say, remember yesterday I was saying that you could basically, it was like whistling through the graveyard in terms of call buying yesterday. There was nothing. In terms of aggressive call buying, there was one SPY order today. This morning there was a couple queues. There was no doubt some put orders too that were bought, but there was some calls in the queues yesterday that went up. This morning that went up a couple times. That looked like somebody was actually buying some of those. There was some things like Williams Sonoma. Remember, Williams Sonoma had really good earnings back here. Somebody was buying calls that expire tomorrow. Also, Chewy saw some calls as well, even though this thing looks pretty beaten up. A lot of resistance up here at 35. I'm still long a little bit of Chewy shares. I took profits, I think, on this day, but I still have a little bit of a position. And I was actually like thinking about dumping it today until I saw the calls go up. So I don't know. Sometimes I don't have that big of a position. Otherwise, I would have gotten out of it already. But you can see a lot of September 31 call action today in Chewy. So again, something a little bit different. Other single name stocks that we saw call buying in, there wasn't many other names, so I'll kind of leave it there for the option. But again, nice to see a little bit of a change in tone comparative to yesterday. A few other things I was going to bring up, some names that had some relative strength, that are kind of looking at. Match was one name that we talked about that I traded yesterday. I did not trade it today, but it looked like the trade would have worked out much, much better. But again, I've been very quick with getting it out of things, especially options, right? If you're trading a lot of options and if you've had a tough time everybody's style is different. But if you've been trying to swing trade options, it is a very, very difficult and sobering type of event, could be for you. So, these are lessons to be learned. Very, very difficult with this volatility to trade options. Stock, on the other hand, is you're probably doing, if you're more of a stock trader, you're probably doing a little bit better. It's just very difficult once I think the VIX gets around 20 or over 20. We talked about how I try to mention this in the pre-market session every morning about position size is when the VIX was a 12 or 13, position size has to be much different, should be much different, right? So if you normally trade, let's say a 10 lot of options, right, that is going to have a lot more risk today when the VIX is over 20 versus a couple weeks back, right? So you really have to make sure that if you're still if you're trying to trade options in this environment, that you're changing your position size along with the volatility that's changed in the market, right? That is a component of option pricing and something that you should be familiar with if you are trafficking in options. But yeah, Match made a nice bounce without me in it today. A couple other names, like, so there, this is where you kind of sit back. I did not do a lot of trading today. I didn't want to get caught up in the chop. I was waiting for some confirmation for a direction. So I did not do. I added one trade. There was a gold miner that saw some call activity today. I don't know if these were bought, but they traded an awful lot of calls. A lot of them were going up on the bid side. They ended up accumulating a pretty decent position. But Zoetis is another name, outperforming. So these days are great when we have chop after a pullback. Where to see the names that are doing pretty well. Remember Team that saw call activity last week. I think that's not a bad place if it happens to get back above 141. I know some of the software names look a little bit subject at this point. Right, this is IGV. This is the software ETF. Right, it's kind of in no man's land at this point. Maybe if it gets down to the 200-day moving averages where I would be a buyer, but we're kind of just like I said, in no man's land. We're below all the short-term moving averages, so really not a place for me unless you've got a really long-term horizon. I mean, this is better than buying it a couple weeks ago at 230, but I almost feel like either A, waiting for a little bit of confirmation that the bottom is in, if we kind of retake a short-term moving average, or if we go down a little bit further to the 200-day moving average, and you can use that. Let's look at this on the weekly chart to see if anything's different. Not much different on there for the software ETF, but you can kind of pick some of these names that may have had pullbacks at this point or are showing a little bit of relative strength. All right, and then one final note. This is something that I sent out last week. I was saying that it's make or break time for Beyond Burger. You could look at my note that I sent out Friday afternoon on this thing. Again, value areas, right? How many times did this thing, hang out on the bottom of value and then it buckled today? I do think that this has more downside to go. These names, you could look at other names. I know I'm not going to compare them to other IPOs because people get upset. It's different this time. But it seems like this is now below all the short-term moving averages. And to me, it looks like a sell. It looks like this is a name that you could play to the short side. Now, of course, they're not going to make it easier. They're not going to make it easy for you because the options are super jacked. So you really have to watch your position size when doing this. But if we put the Venom lines on here, right? So if you want something to the short side, I can't think of a better setup than this. Notice it got down to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. One of my colleagues, Webb, who developed this, says the fifth Venom line is very important. Notice we got down to the fifth Venom line outside value and bounced. So we're kind of in between this. If it can't retake this one, I would say this thing is setting up for another, for more downside ahead. Because again, it is broken, right? It's broken below all the value areas. It did bounce a little bit off that Venom line, which is good. This will give you opportunity to maybe short this. Again, please don't get wrapped up in the emotion. I mean, this is as clean. That's as clean of a break as it gets in terms of that value area. So don't get wrapped up in the emotion and so forth. I know there is a heavy short interest in this. So again, I think you have to be careful how you do it. But I think it's probably one of my favorite shorts at this point in time. All right, guys, have a great night. See you tomorrow.